Hello and welcome to the Alchemists Inkwell.
This is
I'm
your
Emily.
I'm KristaLyn. And this is your spiritual podcast for grounded people. But
I
this
don't
is
know.
also a week with heavy Neptune transits. So grounded is kind of asking a lot for this week.
Oh my God, I cannot say words at
There,
all.
yeah, there was a Mercury Neptune shenanigans transit recently, and then Mercury squared Jupiter, and then went into Capricorn. So we're at least on that side. Mercury is no longer in detriment, but Mercury is now sinking into Capricorn, which
Dang
is
shenanigans. So sorry to mess up our intro.
no worries.
I'm gonna blame Neptune. So
Okay. Okay. Neptune
Neptune.
won't care. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't feel particularly grounded. I'm also really tired, but
Yeah, it's also the day of we are recording this, the day of the full moon in Gemini, which is conjunct Mars, which is out of bounds and being eclipsed by Earth and the moon right now, which is kind of unique because, we don't really take into account other planets being eclipsed by us in astrology and really don't worry about it. But astronomically, it's really cool because the moon is going to block out Mars later this evening just from the sky. So nifty,
nifty.
nifty.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very interesting energy day. I was telling Krista before we hopped on, I haven't even really looked super deep at the energy of the full moon because it just feels wonky.
Mhm.
And I know you're going to be listening to this. Well, if you're in our Patreon, you'll be listening to this later today. If you're not in our Patreon, you'll listen to this, tomorrow or later this week. But it's weird. It's weird energy.
It's out
Wibbly
of
wobbly
bounds,
kind of energy.
chaotic. Yeah, it's a bit chaotic. Both Mars and the moon are out of bounds at the moment, and they're conjunct each other. And Mars is retrograde, and there is a trine from Saturn that is like the string on the kite a little bit, but the kite is in a lightning storm. If you want to give it that kind of analogy. So it makes sense if we're all feeling a little bit hot-tempered, short-tempered, hot and bothered, cranky, anything like that, especially in the area of life that Gemini kind of rules in your house system, in your chart. So whatever house you have Gemini in your chart, and you do have Gemini, even if there's not a planet in there, you do have Gemini. And that is where Mars and the moon are currently transiting in your life. And I've done all this work for you already on my TikTok. I posted horoscopes for every rising sign. So if you're wondering what that is for you, I just put it into a nice question sentence for you on TikTok if you're interested.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no
That's
problem.
helpful.
It's nuts. All of my astrologer friends and I are checking in on each other like, are you okay? This is happening in your such and such house. Yikes.
Yeah, it doesn't feel bad. It just feels weird.
Mhm.
Feels very just off.
It feels like a lit fuse, and either it could be fireworks that you're really excited to see, or it could be dynamite and it might blow something up. It depends on its condition in your chart and the way that your chart works with it.
Fair enough. Cool. Well, today we are going to try to talk about something that is kind of grounded in this very ungrounded time. So it's going to
Everybody
be
reach for
an
your
adventure.
crystals.
I know, right? So first of all, we got our topic request this week from the Patreon. It was what our patrons voted on. So thank you all, patrons. We appreciate you and care about you. You are awesome. We care about everyone, but that's super fun. We appreciate that. And they voted on ancestral healing. So we're going to talk a lot about ancestral healing and how we can go about doing that. But before we do get into that, if you're good with it, Krista, I feel like you should really talk about some of the astrology stuff that is coming up over this next week. Because I know there's a lot going on in December, and I feel like if we talk about that first, it might give people sort of an anchored and grounded perspective on what's happening.
Yeah. So over the next week, as from podcast to podcast, what we're going to be experiencing is on the 9th of December, Venus is going to follow in Mercury's footsteps and square Jupiter right before piecing out over into Capricorn, like literally 29 degrees and then hopping over. So we will experience this square between both benefics, which means yes, it's a challenging aspect, but the benefics themselves aren't really in the mood to argue. They're benefics, right? So if you're going to have a disagreement or something, it's going to be more of like a compromise, or you're going to see something that's like, oh, that's not supposed to be that way. Thank goodness I recognize that. And so you might notice that in your relationships, stuff comes up where you're like, ooh, glad we caught this. Let's do something about it. That it's also a really great time for meditating and asking like what you need to learn, what other things might you have been missing. Do a card pull and let that energy come through and say, hey, here's a block you didn't know you have, or here's what the next best step in your life is to take. Or you can always schedule a consultation with someone who does those kinds of things for you: tarot readers, astrologers, psychic mediums, us, that kind of thing. So whatever technique you feel like to just get a, hey, how am I doing, universe? What's going on? That's a great opportunity to do for the next kind of day or so, as Venus is moving from this square with Jupiter into Capricorn. Still pretty positive, checking our experience against our beliefs and values to make sure that those line up. The 12th will have the sun forming a sextile aspect with Saturn, who is still separating from that square with Uranus. And we're seeing that happening in this sort of unrest in our civil structures, so to speak. And I'm going to let you insert situation here because there's no short list of them. But you'll know what we're referring to when you think about the news headlines lately and how certain people are saying the structure doesn't work anymore. We need better recognition. We need to fix this. That is something that is coming up, and the sun is forming a sextile with Saturn as we're kind of closing the cycle of Saturn for this go round, to be able to say, yeah, let's look at that, because the next time the sun and Saturn meet will be, actually, I have it written down, I believe. Their conjunction will be in February, which will be the last time they meet while Saturn is still in Aquarius. And then Saturn's going to be moving into Pisces with a whole new set of topics to cover. And for all of you out there who have Saturn in Aquarius, you will be done by March with your Saturn return. So there's that as well. It's always very nice. And then finally, on the 14th, the sun will square Neptune, who we are blaming for everything right now. And what that's going to do is that's actually like we're at the third plot point in the story with the sun and Neptune in this cycle. So they will conjoin again around March 13th. So that's a conjunction that will be happening as Saturn is coming into Pisces, as Jupiter is going to still be in Aries at the time. My bad. Mars is moving into Cancer and Pluto is moving into Aquarius. Lots of stuff, again, happening in that charged up energy of March. But for now, we're getting our little last hurrah of this cycle of Neptune, still in Pisces, has been in Pisces for a while, will be in Pisces for a while. So this is just a continuing on of the themes that we've seen with that so far. So themes such as, cultural shifts and certain conflicts going on a cultural level, possibly a spiritual level as well. So for you as an individual, if you're listening to this, it's a great time to be checking in with your spiritual practices, connecting with the divine in a way that works for you. And it's also a great time for belief pulling, to make sure that all the stuff we've been experiencing from the external world hasn't gotten too glued into our belief systems. So working on things to cleanse our own psyches and peace of mind.
Which is nice. I think we all need that. I think that's part of the reason that it feels a little ungrounded as of late too, is because it is a little bit more of a cleansing, more watery sort of energy, I guess is the best way I can describe it for going elements. And I'm glad for this. In some ways, for sure. Cool. Well, it's a great time to talk about ancestral healing then.
Yeah, it really
that's
is.
all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something I could even pin onto the sun square Neptune, because Neptune being in Pisces is the depths. It is the sea of subconscious. And that is where we would hold a lot of our ancestral things that require resolution.
So I know you do a ton of ancestral healing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you do a lot of work in that area. I do less of that. So
yeah. So I do a lot of things having to do with, in mediumship, a lot of the time I'm bringing in ancestors and helping people resolve those kinds of things. And I think it's a lot about closure. And I think ancestral healing is a lot about closure as well, because it's these things that they're beliefs that you have with you because somebody else endured something and then carried a belief that genetically passed on to you. So now you've inherited this belief And you now need to either, work with it because it's something that maybe does help you, but in the context of healing, it's something that is no longer necessary for survival. And so the thing that goes along with it is a certain sense of forgiveness for people that you may or may not be able to still interact with in your life. So with ancestral healing, what you want to do is say, I have this irrational fear. And I will tell you, more commonly, especially for female presenting people or people who are raised with a sort of female culture, it's a lot of the times about their body. Most of the time, it is about the shape of their body and how well it fits into A, B, C, whatever their grandmother thought was a beauty standard at the time. So you want to take that into account. It can also come from your mother, who was raised by your grandmother, who was raised by your great grandmother. So that's where the chain link kind of happens. And sometimes it's an honor to be a link in the chain of some kind of lineage. But in this case, we want to make sure that chain is not rusty, so that it can actually sustain what comes forward and, even heals what goes backwards. One of my favorite things about ancestral healing is that it's commonly believed that you will heal 7 generations ahead of you, but you're also going to heal 7 generations behind you. And I've noticed this happen with at least 2 generations behind me. I was able to study effects on my mom and my grandmother when I would do belief work on myself related to ancestral beliefs. I've noticed things with my more paternal lineage as well when I would do belief work on myself related to ancestral beliefs, particularly in that case around social justice issues. Again, insert social justice issue here. Religion is also going to be another deep one.
Yeah. I find a religion a lot. Like that comes up a lot when I'm doing readings or block pulls for people, you name it, religious blocks that their grandmother held or their grandfather held, or you name it. Those will come through pretty significantly, especially if it was very traumatic for that person to be in a religious space. Then it kind of trickles down the line in a lot of different ways. So those are ones that I definitely recommend putting some energy at looking at for sure.
And when I say that it's like a forgiveness process, think about it this way. If you ever, there's this story, and I love this story, and I've lived this story where grandma has a recipe book, and you can't deviate from the recipe because this was grandma's recipe book that she got from her grandma, that she got from her mom or whatever. And it's like, why do we use these ingredients in this recipe? Why is that so important? Well, I don't know, because that's the way grandma did it. And that's the way her grandmother did it. And like, how cool that we have this level of history, right? And to a certain extent, we really need to appreciate those of us who do have enough awareness of our lineage far enough back to understand this kind of stuff. It's not required to know who was who in your lineage. You can still have a belief, know it came from ancestry, and still resolve it, still heal it, still have a really powerful effect. But in this example, you'll have someone, it's like grandma's recipe, and we did it this way because that's how she did it. And I don't know why, but we're going to keep doing it that way. And then you take that and you share it with somebody else. And we still don't know why, but we're doing it that way. And it turns out grandma just didn't have flour that day, so she substituted with something when she wrote it in. You don't need to. It's not a secret recipe. It's just that's what grandma was doing that day. And now we're substituting every single time without knowing why, and really without needing to. So as an ancestral belief can be something that happened incidentally and was maintained because nobody really questioned why it was still there. They were just focused on maintaining the inheritance of it. So that's why it can be easier than you think to forgive previous generations for not having asked. But isn't it cool that you are asking and that you're taking it upon yourself to heal not only your piece and your link in this chain, but the chains and the links around you?
Yeah. I also want to say with that too, like working with your ancestors is not a requirement either. You don't have to do this work. You will naturally do it if with your own block pulling and healing and releasing and stuff, like you will naturally do it that way. It is not a requirement that you want to channel in and work with your ancestors. Maybe it just doesn't speak to you. Maybe that's something that you're just not interested in. That is totally fine. Also, if you're just not ready to look at all of the things that happened in your ancestral line, if like you have a really not great relationship with your family, perhaps anything like that, then you don't have to. That is not a requirement for being spiritual. I know a lot of people talk a lot about like, oh, my ancestors are here and they're helping me and whatever. I personally don't work with my ancestors basically at all.
I work with
They've never
one
spoken to me.
sometimes.
Yeah, they've never spoken to me. I don't care. I know that's a horrible thing to say. I don't. I know that I didn't come into this lifetime to do a lot of that work. I know I didn't come in to heal a lot of the stuff that they did. That's not me. And I'm okay with that. That's totally fine. I think I'm so interested in ancestry mostly because I do feel, as many people do, like a sincere lack of passed down culture. I know a lot of my ancestry. Like I have very detailed records about both sides of my family going very far back. And still there's a huge severance of culture from both sides. And so that aspect of it, I'm always very interested in. But if you're not feeling drawn to actually like talking to or working with your ancestors, you do not have to. And if you do feel drawn to working with your ancestors, by all means, that's wonderful. Lean into it. But with this notion too, a lot of, if you are healing things or working through things or whatever, you may be holding them on an ancestral level without knowing it, and you're still working through it. That is totally fine. One place to look for like ancestral healing to figure out like, well, what could I do to help some stuff? What beliefs, like limiting beliefs, do your parents and your grandparents hold that you have witnessed? Start by working on pulling and releasing those. Start by affirming yourself out of those. When they try to throw beliefs at you, actively think energetically, I do not accept this. Like, this is return to sender. No, I am not absorbing this. That will start to actively unprogram those things and give you a place to start when it comes to like your ancestral healing space.
Yeah. I've noticed it's helpful for me, like, at the Thanksgiving kind of dinner kind of situation where I noticed that there's attachment to certain topics that prevents even casual or kind interaction or time spent to even happen. So I will go in and say, what don't I like? What am I not looking forward to experiencing with these certain people? And what belief would that be? Do I have that belief? Can I release it? And will that have an effect on how charged up that person is to have that specific conversation with me? Because where I'm resisting it, they're now wanting to put it in because they're feeling that disconnect, right? So if I resolve that belief and it goes back genetically, I have noticed that when I do that, that conversation doesn't happen. And if it does, I can hold a boundary and it doesn't have the power or the, the sustenance to be able to sustain the conversation. So it'll drop. And that person doesn't know how to come at me with it anymore. And then we can find other things to talk about because it's just dinner or whatever. And I don't have to, interact with them on a prolonged period if I don't want to. But also it can really lead to a mending of relationships or a forming of a relationship in a way that wasn't the old way. When it comes to working with ancestors, I do work with one of my direct ancestors. It's my grandmother's grandmother. And I never met her. She was called White Grandma because she had white hair. And I only know of her because as I was getting involved in energy healing, this person kept stepping forward and giving me extra guidance while I'd be working with a client. And eventually I was able, my grandmother gave me something that had belonged to White Grandma because she felt randomly compelled to on my 18th birthday. And so I started asking about this person, and it was even to the picture, the person that was helping me during these sessions. So I will use her as a guide. She'll clap you on the back of the head if you're doing something wrong. And often it's because she wants you to make sure that you are not inserting yourself in someone else's healing process, which I think is really helpful to keep in mind for this as well. You are so intimately involved in ancestral healing, but it is not just about you, and it's not your responsibility to fix your entire lineage just because you're aware of it. You don't have to be that person. Don't martyr yourself energetically or otherwise. Make sure you're doing this first and foremost because it's on your heart, it's on your mind, it's something that you feel needs to be done so that you can move forward, because that's probably a good sign that it is going to be effective for everyone else. If it feels bad to do, then it may not be your role, and you don't have to push yourself to do that.
Yeah. And I do recommend if you do want to start working with your ancestors, if this is a pull that you're feeling, incorporate some part of your ancestral lineage into your day to day, whether that's you light a candle for your ancestors, whether that's you ring a bell for them, or you just say a quick thank you to them once a day. Just start by doing that. And you're going to notice more and more of their energies coming up. You'll notice maybe your family around you sharing things from that. If you don't have any connection to your ancestors in this physical, perhaps you're adopted or something like that, and you're like, I have no idea. That is totally fine. Energetics connection can still exist. So that's why you can start with these kind of more vague, like, I don't know who I'm lighting this candle for, but I know I came from somewhere. So thank you for all the love affairs that led to me being born. That's incredible. That is as simple as it can be. And you can really start bringing in some of that energy of those ancestral things if you really want to work with that. I do want to specify too, like if you know really strongly, like, oh, I'm a second generation immigrant from over here, or like there's a lot of culture there too. You can also look at more cultural things as a whole of like, oh, what are some cultural limiting beliefs that I don't want? Maybe I wasn't raised in that society, maybe you were, but what are like some older cultural things that keep getting passed down? If you notice, to talk about this, Disney's been doing this a lot in their films with like Turning Red and Encanto, where they've been like tackling like breaking cycles in different cultures and that sort of energy. That is something that we're trying to say, like, that is a way that you can work with that. The other thing though too is if you, as we talked about in the mediumship episode, we talked and if you haven't listened to that one, go back and listen to that one, because we talked about mediumship and like talking to past loved ones and that kind of thing. If there's ancestors you don't want to work with, you can tell them you don't want to work with them. Like you aren't calling all of your ancestors that's ever existed to come in and help you. You can say like, hey, if there's an ancestor that had a similar experience, I'd like to work with you. You can specify that for yourself. You don't have to call them all in, especially if you're trying to heal a lot of like bigotry and hatred and all these different things that maybe your ancestors held and you don't want to work with them directly. You can literally just do that work within yourself, do block pulling, read things, watch videos, be educated about those specific issues. And that's going to break that cycle naturally and do a lot of energetic releasing from all of that weight that you're carrying in the ancestral space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just always want to preface that of like, it's not, sometimes you might not want to work with your ancestors specifically, and you can still do ancestral healing, even if you don't want to chat with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, your ancestry is first and foremost you. So anything that you want to work on, you can just say, whoever this person was, whatever energies were involved in this, there it is, like to that or with that or for that, however you want to go about it.
Which makes kind of a big difference. Another thing is food. Food is really important when working with ancestral stuff. It doesn't have to be that you made a meal that is something that your great grandma used to make. It doesn't have to be something that big. It could be that you're like, oh, I know I have some lineage from this culture. I want to try some cultural foods from that place. That's amazing. You can do that, and that will help bring you closer to that ancestral work. But even if you just make a meal and then before you eat it, you thank your ancestors or you share a bit with them or anything like that, there's a really strong connection with food and ancestral stuff, like very, very strong.
Yeah. Similarly with music. If you listen to music well, that is from that culture, that period, that family, even if it's like a record that's been passed down, or you listen to a vinyl instead of a CD or an MP3 or whatever, just in honor of the way they might have done something.
Do we still call them MP3s?
I think they're still MP3s. I mean, we stream music, but when I do audio downloads, they're still MP3 file types. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm a millennial, and in my world, I started with cassettes, and now I'm here.
MP4s when I download that. I have no idea. I don't know what that means, but I was just like, you said that, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I've heard that said in a while, but that I totally understand. I wonder if everyone's
I immediately went back to my like little dinky MP3 player that was just a USB thing and had no screen from like early 2000s. So right, we are moving into a new generation soon, so it makes sense that we're kind of reflecting on ours here.
I got really frustrated last year for Shadow's birthday. We were not going to necessarily get her a phone. We just wanted to get her a music player, and that's not a thing anymore. Really. You can't just get like an iPod the way you could get an iPod, which I think is kind of a miss, to be totally honest, because there is like people who don't want to store their music on their phone, and like kids and stuff like that don't necessarily need a phone to have music. So I think that personally, I feel like that's a miss, but they're really not easy to find. Like you can't really get things
You
that
can't
just
even,
play music anymore, which is weird to me.
yeah, you can't even burn CDs anymore because nothing has a CD drive. By the way, CDs, a dinosaur in their own right at this point.
Well, DVDs are going too.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't touched a DVD player in years. Yeah.
Yeah. So everything's
Speaking of
streaming. Like,
ancestral stuff, we are becoming the ancestors. We're right here, right now.
well, that is the other thing too. I was actually going to touch on this, so thank you for bringing that up. Ancestral stuff goes both ways. So if you have kids or if you have nieces and nephews, or is there a non-binary term for niece or nephew?
I don't know. That's an interesting point. Like I know siblings, I know spouse. I don't think I've explored that. I only have one sibling, a brother who has had children. So my siblings' children, it would be my brother's children
You
or
have,
my
if you have, yeah,
uh,
but if the niece or the nephew is non-binary.
just call them Jacks or call them,
Yeah.
whatever.
No, but as speaking like a general
Yeah.
term, I just
Yeah,
hadn't.
I don't know. If you
Yeah.
know, if a listener
Yeah. If you
knows,
know,
write in
like, please
because
tell
that's
me.
something I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to be inclusive and I realized I couldn't be because I don't
Yeah.
have a word for a non-binary niece or nephew.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Okay.
right now I would just refer to, if I had a non-binary child of my sibling, they would just be
The
the
child of my
child of my
sibling.
sibling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna Google that while you make your point.
Sorry, that just stopped me dead in my tracks. But if you
Yeah,
have
no.
little children's in your life, and you've noticed that they are really struggling with things, like they're, maybe they have fears of things that seem irrational, but you can see, oh, Chris started laughing. What is it? What's the term? What's the
Sorry.
term?
The first, according to Merriam-Webster,
Okay.
the gender neutral term to refer to a child of one sibling is nibbling. I have heard this before. So I have two nibblings.
I have many nibblings.
I love it. I totally
Okay.
forgot about it.
I didn't,
Also
I've heard the term, but I
sib kid would be another one.
sib kid. Okay.
Yeah. Nibbling,
I prefer nibbling.
neef or
Neef.
nephew, chibling, according to them.us,
Okay.
them.us. Yeah. So that's answers
Okay.
and advice for non-binary. Yeah.
Cool. So your nibblings, if you've
My
got
nibblings
nibblings or
or my sib
children
kids.
in your life, and you share some sort of DNA lineage, etc., with them, doing ancestral work, it can be as simple as being like, oh, like they're displaying things that they're struggling with, even though they're a little in, like, how do I hold that? Can I pull and release that? And that will help them. It was really interesting when my kids were really little. I did a lot of work on my fears of the dark and my fears of all of these paranormal things, and then they started sleeping better through the night, and I was like, oh, there we go. This is another thing that is very much an ancestral healing space, that helps big time. What I will also say, if you really feel like I want to work with personal ancestors, like I want to work with, like, I like the way you work with white grandma, like I want to work with that level of being, ask for one to come forward. Which one of my ancestors wants to help me? That in and of itself can make a huge, huge difference.
You know what is a very beautiful fiction book that goes into this extraordinarily well?
No.
Legendborn.
Oh yeah.
I'm getting
And the
ready to
second
read.
one.
I'm getting ready to read the second one right now. That's my next Audible thing. Like this week, it will be. I'm so excited. But in that book, they do such a great job with channeling ancestry and with really grappling with having an awareness of ancestry or a lack thereof. It's
Yeah.
a really great book to read as far as ancestral healing goes, especially for modern day United States and elsewhere.
No, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Blood Marked is the next one, right?
Blood Marked is the next one. I'm so stoked.
Yeah, it's also Arthurian legend retelling. So if you like Arthurian legend, you will love it. I have fears about the next one, which happens when I really love a first book.
Yep.
I'm
Same.
like, oh, please don't do the thing I think you might be doing. Please don't do the thing I think you might be doing. So I'm hoping that that doesn't happen. And that's all I'm going to say about it.
Yeah. The cover gives me hope.
Yeah. Yes. But I'm excited about that. That's a really good book recommendation for this. That's a really good book recommendation
Yeah.
for this. Yeah. I also recommend write letters to your ancestors. It's a really simple way of doing very deep energetic work. You know, whether it's a woman who held a lot of pain of being a woman somewhere in my ancestry, or it's, you know, my great great grandma Joe, like whatever you want to address it to, or grandpa, of course. But that's really helpful. Like just write a letter, tell them what you wish you could, you know, that no one you were sure of told them that while they had lived. They will actually get that energy, and then you can burn it, you can bury it, you can do whatever you want to do with it. That letter, once you've written it, you can hold on to it. It's totally your choice, but that will start to build some bridges and mend some gaps in those spaces.
Yeah, I actually totally agree, because when the first of my grandmothers passed away, one of the things that came through afterwards was there was a lot of hurt and misunderstanding from the way relationships had been with her, specifically with, you know, the females in the family, or the people who present female anyway, and were brought up that way. And so all of this came up, you know, the daughters and the grandchildren, the children were all like, why was it this way? How did it happen this way? And I was directly involved in my grandmother's process from here to what comes next. And she actually did come through and explained how it was adversity that she experienced and could not overcome because of culture, because of, you know, being a woman in the world at the time, and not being able to do things that she really felt she wanted to do, but didn't have access to. And so that led to the way she felt about herself and the way that she then treated the rest of us, which led to a lot of forgiveness retroactively from my cousins, my aunts and uncles, or parents, siblings, whatever you want to call those at this point. And
Siblings?
yeah, I looked it up. There's no like agreed upon that I could find. But I would guess like piblings if we're gonna do the other way.
Okay.
Yeah. So your parents, siblings, and your siblings, and your, you know, the generations even immediately around them. That was really interesting to witness, being able to say, hey, this is why that happened. And everybody was just like, oh. And if we would have known in, you know, in while they were still here, that would have been fine too, but it would have been almost more awkward. I think there is that awkwardness of having to sit with that. So it's a really interesting space to be able to fill.
Yeah, absolutely. With that too, if you don't, and this isn't quite ancestry, this is kind of a little past life side note. A lot of people are like, who in my life have I had past lives with, especially in your family, because there's like the belief in karma, or like karmatic healing, or like you're doing that sort of reincarnation cycle with people. That is not a requirement. Like there's a lot of people who have never had a life with anyone in their family ever before. You picked this to break cycles. You picked it because that's the life that's going to secure you these lessons, or it's going to secure you this path forward. Like whatever it is, that's not a requirement. So it's not like, oh, I need to, in order to heal this relationship with my mom, I have to look at past life stuff, ancestral stuff, and blah, blah, blah. You might not have a past life relationship with your mom, and that's not going to give you a lot. And then you're just going to end up feeling confused and frustrated. So that's the other thing that I get a lot in readings with people is they're like, you know, have I had a past life with him? Why is this so hard? I'm like, actually, it's really hard because you haven't had a past life with him before. You've never understood each other, and you aren't on the same wavelength. Like none of this is even remotely the same. You just share DNA. And so it's more of a body healing thing than it is a spirit healing thing, a soul healing thing. So there's just different layers and levels in which you can hold this on. And I just want to kind of clear up that misunderstanding too, because it's just not common. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So there's some ancestral healing stuff. We
Yeah, that
talked
time
about it.
flew. That was amazing. Great
Yeah.
topic choice, you guys. Thank you so much. Keep giving us suggestions, because this is really fun.
Yeah. Absolutely. The two ones we have to vote on that are coming up are like winter solstice, holiday tradition, spiritual things. So
Winter holiday practices.
winter holiday practices, and how to incorporate like actual spiritual energetic fun into your life in a way that's high vibrational and actually like works for you. So those are the ones to vote between. If you want to vote between them, join the Patreon. Please come hang out with us there. We love it. It's really fun to get to interact with you all there and get questions and get to, give a bonus video. It's really just a pleasure. So yeah, if you want to vote on those, let us know.
Another way to be able to interact with us a lot more one-on-one is through the Forgotten Storytellers, which is still accepting pitches. So we're running short on the pitch window. So if you're someone who has a story you want to share, and a lot of them do deal with ancestral healing, this is a great way to practice that and kind of flow it out with the support of us and your cohort that you'll be working with at the same time. Go ahead and pitch your story to Forgotten Storytellers. We work with fiction stories that heal people.
That is basically what it is. If you have an idea, it's worth giving it a shot and seeing if this is the next space forward. Also, ask your guides if you're like, should I pitch this thing? Like, ask them, like, give me a clear, like, unmissable validation in the next day if I should do it. And they will show up for you and probably be like intense about it. So that's the best way I'm going to describe it. But go ahead, ask. It's really helpful to ask their opinions and their thoughts on those things.
Yeah, perfect.
If you're listening to this on Wednesday, happy full moon. If you're listening this tomorrow, I hope your full moon is great. Enjoy.
Yeah, do your best to stay safe. Don't do anything like really too impulsive, because there is injury kind of energy in the air, or action energy in the air. So choose aligned and intentional action so that you can maybe hopefully avoid any energies of injury.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we appreciate you. Have a lovely week, and we hope that you take all this information and you
go
make some magic.
I mean, it is what it is.